Episode 70, the co-founder and CEO of Whole Foods and the co-founder of Conscious Capitalism, John Mackey. Welcome to The Art of Excellence, a show about people doing extraordinary things in their lives. I'm your host, Glenn Zweig. Thanks for joining me. My guest today is John Mackey. John is the co-founder and CEO of Whole Foods Market and co-founder of the nonprofit Conscious Capitalism. He is a co-author of the book Conscious Capitalism, as well as his latest book called Conscious Leadership, Elevating Humanity Through Business. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Glenn.
So John, let's start out with going back in time, and was hoping you could maybe paint me a picture, if you will, of your childhood. Because I know that the interest in healthy living and sustainability and the environment and all these important values to you wouldn't surface till later in life. So what were you into back then?
Of course, we don't understand our childhoods until we get older and grow up and reflect back on them and put them in some type of historical context. So my parents were Depression. They grew up in the Depression. They were like, my dad was 21 when he joined the military in World War II. And I think like a lot of people that had gone through the Depression and the war, when they got out of it, so when the suburbs really boomed, they just wanted to have a safe place to raise a family and some room for the kids to run around in. So I grew up in a suburb of Houston, Texas, and I was born in 1953. So my youth was in the 50s, and then I came of age in the 60s and got conscious, I suppose, in the 70s. So in some ways, it was the typical middle-class childhood. My father was a college professor at that time. He taught accounting at Rice University, commuted in, and we were like a Leave It to Beaver family or a father's knows best type of family. We were suburban family and middle class and went to public schools. I look back on it, a fairly idyllic childhood. I mean, I felt safe and I felt loved. From a dietary standpoint, I ate the diet of that time, which was processed foods, because that's when they were really coming into vogue. And
Yeah.
my mother not having to spend all her day cooking, she was a stay-home mother, right? She taught, and then when she had kids, she stopped teaching and raised a family. So that's kind of my early childhood.
If you're okay with my digging just a little bit here, and not trying to pop a hole in the idyllic childhood.
You'll have trouble doing that. So it's in my memory.
But from what I read, John, it feels like you had a somewhat complicated relationship with your dad, because it seemed that he was very demanding of you. And when you were young, he would criticize you a lot.
Yeah.
And you mentioned how you would once bring home a report card, all A's and just one B. And he looked at you and said, "Well, John, what are you going to do about that one B?" Like nothing was really good enough.
Right. It's true.
But then later in life, as you started Whole Foods, he would become an important mentor and an advisor to you. So I'm just trying to reconcile these two. Like, did this overbearing nature of him, did it cause you to want to try harder and earn his praise, or make you even want to go the other way and rebel to some degree? Let's
put a little more context around that.
Okay.
So my father, he was demanding. He wanted excellence. On the other hand, he spent time with his kids. He wasn't like totally distant, uncaring, detached father. He spent time with us playing baseball, playing football, taught me how to play golf. My brother and I played golf with him. And yeah, we got time with him in the weekends, and also doing chores, because we weren't given an allowance. If we wanted any money to spend, we had to earn it. So I learned to work. I learned the value of work at a very young age. And I liked it because it was my money and I got to spend it how I chose, which was comic books when I was a kid and books, and then music when I got a little older. And as soon as I could, I started to work. So anyway, my father once he left, he stopped teaching accounting in the 60s. He only had an MBA at Rice University, and that was when they were trying to make everybody a PhD. So I think he loved teaching, but he didn't want to go get this doctorate. And so he went and started practicing accounting, which is what he was teaching, and ended up rising up chief financial officer in different companies. And he became a CEO of a small, at that time, sort of hospital management company back in the 60s, in the late 60s. And they began to grow that company through acquisition. This was when, remember, Medicaid and Medicare kicked in the middle 60s, and that created a boom for for-profit hospitals, dental clinics, things like that. Mm-hmm. So they ended up being a public company, and he ended up making a fair chunk of money before that company was sold off and merged into Hospital Corporation of America. So he was my business mentor. I didn't take any business classes when I went to university. I studied, I just took electives, honestly. Never graduated. I just took courses I was interested in. So I have a lot of philosophy background, religion, world literature, humanities, anthropology, anything I was interested in. I took classes or audited them, which gave me a lot of freedom. And so I sort of took control of my life at an early age. And I bucked my parents at an early age because they were very unhappy. And of course, while they were paying for school, when I stopped moving towards a degree, I was on my own. But this was back in the early 70s. And if you lived communally and didn't own a car and had good health, you could live on very little money. I worked part-time jobs as busboys and dishwashers, and 20 hours a week, and I earned enough money to have a comfortable living. So,
well, I want to actually talk about this stage of your life because, you dropped out of school, as you mentioned, and we've got, of course, the Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg kind of narrative where you drop out because you've got this idea and you go out and you start a company. And of course, you would go on to build an incredible company over time. But that wasn't why you dropped out. That wasn't when you started Whole Foods. So what was behind you just were bored or what?
There's only a couple of years between stopping to get a degree and starting up the company. So, mm-hmm. And in that 2 years, I was still taking classes, still auditing classes. I think unlike the Gates narrative, I didn't have to drop out of school because I had to do my business. Mm-hmm. I was a self-directed learner at that point, and I continued to be a self-directed learner. When I got into business, it was this whole universe of new learning opened up to me. It was like, oh my gosh, wow, business is far more interesting than I had ever thought possible. It's an infinite game, which is a book I read in the last year by Simon Sinek that was encapsulated it for me. It's infinitely complex. It's a game that never ends. It goes on. And I just couldn't learn enough about it. So I just sort of didn't stop, but my self-directed learning just went into another thing called, I want to learn this business game. I want to get good at it. And so I threw all my passion into it and made a lot of mistakes, but read hundreds of business books. And my dad mentored me. That's when I began to draw close to my father. He was thrilled that this sort of prodigal son of his, who didn't want to go get his degree and become a lawyer or a doctor, and never took any business classes, partly in rebellion against him, all of a sudden wanted to do a business because I was on fire about natural and organic foods because I'd moved into this vegetarian co-op. I had a food consciousness awakening. I had no idea food could affect the way we felt, our health, our vitality, how we slept, our overall intelligence. I had no idea. And when I began to learn about it, I was fascinated by it and wanted to do the business that sold this type of foods.
One part you left out, which I think is sort of interesting, is when you moved into this vegetarian co-op, you weren't a vegetarian at the time.
That's correct. But what I was interested in all things counterculture in the early 70s.
Okay.
We always hear about the 60s because there was riots going on and the Berkeley free speech movement. But a lot of the whole counterculture explosion occurred in the 70s, not the 60s. There was a more full blossoming of it. And I was fascinated by it. I grew my hair long. I grew a beard. I began to wear different kinds of clothing. I was studying Eastern religion, learning to meditate. I was interested in alternative religion. I was interested in alternative food. I was interested in alternatives. So I very much deeply got into the counterculture. And so a vegetarian co-op is like, boy, there are going to be a bunch of interesting people living there. A lot of interesting women living there.
Okay, so here's the subplot, I guess. So we'll fast forward here a bit, and as legend has it, I think it was 1978. You borrow $45,000 from friends and family to open a small health food store.
I borrowed $10,000. I didn't have enough money.
Okay. So 10,000 in hand to start this health food store called Safer Way.
Right.
And it didn't really go anywhere. So what happened with Safer Way? What didn't go so well?
We just didn't know what we were doing. We opened this store in this house about half a mile from where I'm sitting right now. And I've had Safer Way was the first iteration of the building that I'm in right now. It was an old house, and we had a vegetarian store, a vegetarian cafe, and an office on the third floor. And Renee and I moved out of the co-op and moved into the office to save the cost of rent. And it didn't go that well because we know what we were doing. We lost half our money in the first year. And meanwhile, I'm desperately trying. We had no business background. I just had taken unskilled jobs so I didn't really know anything about business. Neither did she. So, but by all rights, we should have failed, except, I had good mentorship from my father. And I don't know what to say, but I was very driven, very, very driven to learn everything I could. And even after the first year, when we lost half the money, I thought, wow, we need to get a bigger store. We are too small to really win. I've always been a very competitive person, and I've always wanted to win. I played high school basketball. I played college, city league basketball, any kind of game, any kind of sport. People would say, John takes it very seriously. He's very intense. And even though as I've gotten older and a little more emotionally intelligent, I'm not nearly as obnoxiously competitive as I was when I was younger. Still, the fire burns within me. I generally want to do my best. I want to win. I want to be excellent. And I played a game last night that's fascinating me, a board game with friends it's called Wingspan. And honestly, it's a great game. It's complex. And I don't usually win this game. And I'm constantly trying to figure out how to be better at this game. And I'm studying my friends. What are they doing that's letting them beat me every time? I'm asking them questions. They're not giving me too many good answers, but I am studying their moves, studying what they're doing and imitating, trial and error. And I'm getting better every time I play. I feel certain that I'll get bored with this game probably in the next year because I'll master it and it won't be so fun and interesting. Part of it is that I'm not that good at it. So I find that fascinating that, okay, I'm going to learn how to get good at this game and win at it. You might say that's the funnest kind of game for me, a complex game that challenges me to learn and grow and get better.
Yeah. I don't know if you've binged Queen's Gambit, and now I'm re-engaged with the game and I'm at that same point which is how do I get better at this thing? I know there could be a whole book or series of books written just on the success of Whole Foods.
There's never been a book written about it. So.
but there should. There you go. I'll take 10% for the idea. And I know you could go through a long list of things that had to get done. But, looking back, I mean, clearly you course corrected from that first one. You changed the offering, changed the format, made it bigger, et cetera. But even when you have something that works, in this day and age, certainly in this country, a hyper-competitive capitalist society, you have a lot of copycats. And even when you have a good thing going, it's one thing to have a better natural foods, Whole Foods grocery store. It's another thing to sustain that edge and that advantage over not just years, but decades to build the kind of company you did. Are there one or two things you pointed to that you think you and the company did so well that others couldn't emulate?
Well, sure. The first thing is the conventional supermarkets didn't take us seriously for a long, long time. And the world was different. It was competitive, but it wasn't hyper competitive like it is today. We weren't so connected. We didn't have the internet. Information did not travel at the speed of light like it does today, where ideas are quickly discovered. And we've accelerated our learning curve tremendously as a culture and as an economy and as a world. Back then, we flew under the radar. I'd say we've been in business now for over 42 years. First 20 years, nobody paid any attention to us. Supermarkets did not take us seriously. As one venture capitalist told me, you guys are just a bunch of hippies selling food to other hippies. And fine, nobody's going to pay any attention because that's a really small market. And one thing I've learned about change is that most change starts on the edge. And it begins to slowly penetrate over time into more of the center of things. And most of the time, it doesn't penetrate to the center of things. Most of the time, it stays on the edge. And I think that's how most conventional supermarkets saw us. And remember, Whole Foods was in the shadow of Walmart. While Whole Foods was birthed, Walmart was beginning to open up supercenters. And that they got all the attention of the conventional supermarket industry. They were just Walmart obsessed. And then Costco and companies like Costco came around, the club, and they were preoccupied with that. So they were trying to get their costs down and get their prices down so they could compete. And Whole Foods just was ignored because we just weren't relevant enough for anybody to pay attention to. And then we did have other small natural food stores that were opening up that began to be bigger stores like Whole Foods. Here's the thing. We knew most of the other main players in the business. They were our friends. We were building this industry together. And I think what Whole Foods did that gave us ultimately the edge over, we just went public. We went public, and that created a currency that enabled us to buy out the best players who were like us. And we gained intellectual capital from every one of them, and we gained talent, and we gained the way they did things. We didn't assume that Whole Foods, just because we were acquiring them, necessarily knew how to do things better, at least not early on. We thought, let's combine our talents here. And so we were always looking at what the other company we acquired did better than we did, and we would learn and copy them. So that really was it. And then by the time we got to scale and the supermarket started to pay attention to us, we were already too big at that point to just, Yeah.
You had the scale, you had the brand. Interesting story. I want to sort of zero in here on a very challenging period in your life. 2001, you were on the cusp of being fired by the board from the very company that you had founded a couple decades earlier. And this was from the outside looking in, a flourishing company. It was doing, I think, at least a couple billion in sales at this time. And you had to go and essentially defend yourself to keep your job, to stay on as CEO, which you did. But it seemed like it was a real awakening for you. Could you share that story and what happened?
Well, I did almost get fired, and I was at kind of one of my most vulnerable times when I was most vulnerable to being fired, because that was back in the internet boom, the first .com boom in the late 90s. And then, we bought a company called Amrion, based in Boulder, Colorado, back in the late 90s. We were vertically integrating on the nutritional supplement side of the business. They were also a manufacturer and a mail order house. And as the internet started to take off, you realize, wow, mail order catalog is a great foundation piece. They already have people used to getting stuff delivered to them via the mail. So we thought, you know what, why don't we do a larger lifestyle? This is back when LOHAS, lifestyles of health and sustainability, we were becoming conscious of that a lot of people were choosing to live a lifestyle of environmental sustainability and natural and organic foods and healthier eating and healthier lifestyles. So we thought, well, the internet will allow us to be a national company, and we can market to our customers more things than just natural and organic foods. We thought this opened up a lot of new categories for us. So we tried things like travel vacations that would be foodie type of vacations. It was a pretty good idea. It was really, actually, I think we were just early to the game. This was back where you were in a panic mode. If you didn't get this thing up and running, then you were going to be left in the dust forever. So we jumped into it. We raised venture capital money. My wife and I moved to Boulder, Colorado. I stepped back and said, I'm still, going to be CEO, but I had one of my executives take over and basically focus on the day-to-day part of the business so I could focus on this internet opportunity. And, it didn't work. We didn't get any sales. And I realized after a year that this thing was years and years away from being a successful business. Our stock price was declining. People didn't like what we now think of an omni-channel. Back then was seen as a total waste of resources and time and attention focused on something else. So the market was destroying our stock price, and we just sold out the business and closed it, got out, moved back to Austin. But the guy that was running the company at that time, he really didn't. He liked running the company. He didn't want me to come back. And so when I did, and I was vulnerable to this, having the internet thing fail, that I had a couple of directors plus him that really wanted me to go for different reasons. So I was vulnerable. And one of the things that happens when you're a successful entrepreneur, because I've seen it happen. It happened to myself, but I've seen it happen to many other successful entrepreneurs that start to become very successful. You get a certain hubris. You begin to start thinking that you're particularly smart, talented, and special, and that can breed a little bit of arrogance. And at that time, I never took a board of directors that seriously. Right? I mean, that was a legal thing we had to do. We had to have a board because that was required by the shareholders, but it had started out with a closely family board, and then we brought in some outsiders, but we'd recruited those folks. So I had not made this transition to seeing this as a professional board. I report to the board. They can fire me. I mean, I guess I read all that, but I didn't think it somehow applied to me. So that was a total wake-up call for me. It was like, wow, this board could fire me, almost has fired me. I'm going to have to change my relationship with the board. That was my first takeaway. Mm-hmm. Then I'd been betrayed by an executive that had worked for me for 16 years, who I really trusted. I thought we were close friends. I was very, very surprised. And it was like, wow, I've got to rethink my relationships with all my executives if something like this could happen. I want to make sure this never happens again. And what is it about me? And that mostly then the biggest ultimate learning was, how do I need to grow as a leader so that I'll never be in this situation again? I've always had a belief that when things happen that are challenging in our lives, there's no better opportunity to learn and grow than in those challenging times. Crisis is a tremendous opportunity to accelerate your own life growth, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and I think intellectually as well. So I did a lot of things to accelerate my growth. I got deeper into meditation. I started doing a practice called holotropic breath work, began to read deeper, began to realize I needed to work on my emotional intelligence, my communication skills. My wife likes to joke that my husband's become very emotionally intelligent, not because it came natural to him. He just read a lot of books on it and did what they told him to do and got better at it. And I think that's absolutely true. I didn't have the language to be a conscious leader at that time, but that's what I had embarked on. I'm going to be a conscious, more emotionally intelligent, more spiritually awake leader, because A, that's what Whole Foods needs me to be. And B, because now I've got this whole new thing to learn about. So it's like, remember how I talked about, I like learning things. It's like, wow, this stuff's fascinating. There's this whole inner world. I mean, I played around with it, but now I started doing serious work on it, work on myself, also humbling myself. I'm not as smart as I thought I was. I have a lot to learn. So it was just a total wake-up call for me, and I became a better person and a better leader as a result.
Yeah, no, that's great, John. So let's get into this whole notion of conscious leadership. And just to sort of frame it here, let's start with conscious capitalism. So in 2019, Business Roundtable, so just last year, Business Roundtable is a group of CEOs representing some of the largest companies in the world. They formally redefine the purpose of a corporation as being to benefit not just shareholders, but all stakeholders, including customers, team members, suppliers, communities. And in a nutshell, that's really what conscious capitalism is all about, a much broader set of stakeholders. But then you've got the leader of these organizations. And just as the organizations need to evolve, the leaders do as well, because you've got to become more conscious in order for the organization to become more conscious. And you have a whole number of behaviors that we won't be able to touch on all of them, but I definitely do want to touch on a few of them. Behaviors that a leader should take on to become more conscious. And one of those is what you call to put purpose first. And you say that purpose is an evolutionary journey. It's really hard to get a sense of direction, and even once you do, it's got to be rediscovered, reinvented, and renewed over and over. It's like an ongoing, lifelong pursuit. So, John, I was hoping, I guess, to hear about your own personal journey and how your life's purpose has evolved over time.
Yeah, I think one of the key words you just used is evolution, because it does evolve, it deepens. You look back, I can look back at my own life and see that it all makes sense retrospectively, right? I can see the choices I made. I can see the things that drew me forward. They all point toward the things we're passionate about, point towards purpose. So like I move into the vegetarian co-op and I have this food awakening. And that was the first time I'd ever realized that you could feel better, be healthier, and live longer if you ate a healthier diet. I didn't know it. I didn't really know it. I might have had an idea that's true, but then I began to experience it, and I've been experiencing it ever since. And I've continued to evolve and learn more and more about healthy eating and healthy lifestyle. So that's been a real driver for me for 42 years. So the higher purpose of Whole Foods, which happens to be my own personal higher purpose in life, that's not an accident because I embody it. It's what's driven me, is to nourish people on the planet. And there's deeper meanings to those, what nourish means and what people means and what planet means. And there's a lot of different levels to it. When Renee and I started Safer Way, the precursor to Whole Foods Market, that purpose was implicit, although not yet conscious. If you'd asked me back then what the purpose of Safer Way was, or Whole Foods in the first year or two, it would have been something like this. Well, we want to sell healthy, natural, and organic foods to people. We want to earn a living, and we want to have some fun. That was it. That's what was driving us. Mm-hmm. And all three of those things are still very present in Whole Foods. Although I'll have to say, in the year of COVID, fun it's not as fun this year as it's been in other years.
That's for sure.
So here's the thing. Purpose is something, as you build an organization. Whole Foods now is a huge company. We have 20 billion in sales. We got 100,000 people working for the company. And that's, of course, small in terms of the context of Amazon. Now, the owner of Whole Foods is much larger than that, much larger. And as a company grows and evolves, you can't take purpose for granted, because the entrepreneur, the founders, are going to be embodying that purpose. But others that come on are attracted initially to the passion that the founders may have towards the business. And they are attracted to the same purpose that the founder was manifesting. But over time, as an organization grows, it begins to attract people to it who just want a job. And it attracts people to it who think this is going to be a good job. I can earn more money. I can get promoted. Mm-hmm. So you begin to attract people who are not so purpose-driven, not so mission-driven, or more transaction-driven. So if you want the purpose to stay alive in the company, you have to put it first. And that means that you have to first embody it and live it yourself, because people pay a lot more attention to who you are and what you do than just what you say, right? So you have to embody that purpose, and then you have to constantly teach it. And you have to make sure everybody coming into the organization understands what that higher purpose is, understands what your core values are, understands what your leadership principles are. And so that's what Whole Foods has been doing. And one of the interesting things we've done since the merger with Amazon 3 years ago now, over 3 years ago, we realized Amazon has a very powerful culture. And if we were going to maintain Whole Foods' purpose and culture, even that we're 16 years older than Amazon, we needed to take some proactive steps. And one of the things we've done that's been very good is we created a program in Whole Foods we call cultural champions, where we encourage our team members to voluntarily go through a program where we get into the purpose of the company, we get into our core values, we get into our leadership principles, and they have to take a test eventually to get certified cultural champion. And then we will meet with our cultural champions, and together we will talk about how we can make the company better, we can make our culture strong and our purpose more embedded in the overall organization. So I've got literally thousands and thousands now of cultural champions that have been certified in the last 2 years that are out there acting as little missionaries for the values and the purpose and culture of Whole Foods. So purpose is so important. And if you lose your way, and most companies do eventually lose their way, the founders get old, they retire, and it falls back on a transaction of just, let's make money. And the business begins to slowly move away from centering around its foundational purpose to a more the transactional one of, well, how do we maximize profits here? I think when that happens, a certain part of the spark of the business begins to disappear.
And I imagine probably makes it easier when the founder is still at the helm years, decades later. The fact that you're there, Bezos at Amazon, right? Because those foundational principles are still embodied in that person, and you're still leading the organization.
Elon Musk is at Tesla, and still have Larry Page and Sergey Brin at Google. I mean, a lot of the greatest companies. I mean, I'm on the board of the Motley Fool, which is founder-led, and they're an investing newsletter company. And
yeah.
One of the principles the Motley Fools will teach for selecting stocks is they have a real bias towards founder-led companies. They believe founder-led companies outperform the marketplace.
That's interesting. So another behavior that you preach in the book is integrity, which, seems sort of obvious. But you talk about the fact that leading with integrity entails integrating one's shadow. And our shadow represents aspects, as I understand it, aspects that we don't like of ourselves, things that make us uncomfortable and perhaps, and maybe I'm taking a little creative license here, but perhaps make us feel some shame or some guilt. And we're used to repressing these feelings, keeping these things on the inside, and you say, no, you shouldn't. I was hoping you can maybe unpack that a bit, and perhaps there's a personal example you could share.
Well, the easiest way to understand the shadow, Glenn, is that shadow is the part of our being that we're just not conscious of. That's why it's a shadow. If we're conscious of it, it's not shadow. Mm-hmm. Shadow is the part of ourselves. Some parts of our shadow are not necessarily negative. They could be positive parts of our being that we haven't brought to our conscious awareness. But generally, the things that we don't like about ourselves, things that we don't want to acknowledge, are easier to repress from our consciousness and go into the shadow because we're ashamed of them, or we're not proud of them, or we're in denial about them. It's like somebody saying, who you happen to know has a very bad temper, saying, I really don't have a bad temper. If I get angry, I always have really good reasons to be angry. Other people experience the shadow side of that person. Is this a really angry person? They're not even conscious of how angry they are most of the time. That's in the shadow. In my case, we're going to talk about things that I've had to unearth. The whole thing I was sharing about earlier about my lack of emotional intelligence and sensitivity, those were part of my shadow. If you'd asked me 20 years ago, whether I thought I had problems in that area, I would have said, no, I don't. But if you'd have talked to my wife and my close friends, they just said, oh yeah, John this is a total blind spot for him. He doesn't see this about himself at all. And so if we don't deal with our shadow, life has a way of whacking us to get us to wake up. It's like the shadow will continue to sabotage who we are and our highest possibilities because we haven't yet owned that part of our being. Now, if we have people that care about us, they can help us gently to make ourselves more aware of the parts of our being that we don't want to own, that we don't want to acknowledge. I'm very fortunate. I have a very conscious wife who has been very patient with me. I'm a major project of hers in life to help me to become more conscious and evolve. And she's really gently helped me see things about myself that I was in denial about, and they were definitely in the shadow side.
And John, when you think about this, for lack of a better word, this awakening you've had, becoming more self-aware, higher EQ, integrating your shadow, have you noticed, or have others noticed, how that translates into you as a leader?
I think if you ask people today how I'm a different leader than people that have known me a long time, and if they were able to look at the story, they would say John is he's a much more loving leader than he used to be. He's more caring, he's more compassionate, just cares about his team more, he cares about the people at Whole Foods more. And by the way, it's not like you have this one awakening, right? And now you're enlightened. It's a series of awakenings. It's a journey. I've had lots of different epiphanies. But then there's just the day-to-day realization that you don't always notice, that over a period of time is you can look back and say, yeah, that was an awakening, but it was a gradual one, not just a magical one over one day. So I would say that one of the things that I began to realize in the 10 or 15 years ago, maybe I got the first glimpse when I had the whole board coup, the whole quote coup thing, was that I began to realize that I was giving my mind to Whole Foods, my intelligence, but I hadn't truly given it my heart. And that's what was being called for me. That's the part of my shadow side that wanted to fully integrate. The company wanted my love. They didn't just want, I'm the father. They wanted dad to love them, just like I wanted my dad to love me. I make mention sometimes, I don't know if I made mention in the book, but when I tour our stores, I have found that people want my unconditional love of their stores. They don't want my criticisms. I've learned that really they get up early, they go and make their stores beautiful as they can. And they've made sacrifices for the company, including just that day. They've lost some sleep, and they want to be appreciated.
They don't want to hear about the 1B. They want to hear about the 5 A's, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. If that's a very, very astute observation. They don't want to hear about the B's, and they certainly don't want to hear about the F's. They want my approval. And so I've learned that I'm a more effective leader if I lead through appreciation. And sure, the store may need some negative feedback. I found it's better not to give it to the whole group, maybe to call a store team leader aside or towards the very end and say, here's what I loved about the store. Here's a few things I think you could improve on. And by the way, that's the right way. My dad should have done the whole, 5 A's, 1B, or 6 A's and 1B. He should have said, son, I'm so proud of you for these 5 A's. That's astounding. You've done a great job here. Is there anything I can do to help you with on that B?
Yeah. I
would have felt supported, right? And encouraged rather than, you're still not good enough. So that is a life lesson for me. And as I got more conscious, I've begun to apply that lesson to Whole Foods Market.
Well, you mentioned appreciation, and I think one of the rituals that you have at Whole Foods, I believe before you end any meeting there, you ask if anyone would like to appreciate a fellow team member.
Right.
Have you always done that, or is that something more recent?
No, we haven't always done it, but we've been doing it. Well, it's been there for decades. It's very powerful. I always say, if you want to lead with love, this is the gateway. Because when you do appreciations at the end of a meeting, it seems sort of easy and innocent. And I've had a lot of other companies begin to do this, and they report back and say, you are absolutely right. This has transformed our organization. You end the meeting with voluntary appreciations. No one has to do it. Here's the 2 things that happen when you do that. The first one is, first of all, you have to lead by example. I always make sure that I give these most heartfelt appreciations where a person is like, wow, I had no idea John felt that way about me. Because you can't do an authentic appreciation, Glenn, unless you open your heart. You just can't do it. And people know the difference. Human beings are so sensitized, A, to hypocrisy, and B, to bullshit when they know you're just telling them something and you don't really mean it, right? So it has to be an authentic appreciation. An authentic appreciation opens the heart. There's no escaping it. You will be sharing and expressing love, even if it's not, sentimental gushing. You're sharing an authentic appreciation. Secondly, when you receive an authentic appreciation, it's impossible to maintain the judgment about someone the way that you had. You'll begin to rethink that person. If they could give an authentic appreciation to you that's heartfelt, you will feel differently about that person going forward. So, and this has a ripple effect. So yes, it's institutionalized at Whole Foods. Again, we don't force people to do appreciations, but we do it all the way. Whole Foods consists of lots of interlocking teams. And we do it at the most highest teams that I'm part of are always in with appreciations. Actually, every organization I'm affiliated with, I try to get them to do appreciations. It's a game changer.
So you also espouse the need to take time away from work to reinvigorate yourself, to recharge the batteries so you can stay fresh. And it seems like you've really taken that to heart, because I believe you've hiked the Appalachian Trail not once, but 3 times.
I've hiked the complete trail twice.
All right. Well, the fact you even did it the first time, and then the Pacific Crest Trail as well. And for those that don't know, these aren't little weekend excursions we're talking about. I mean, these are both over 2,000 miles and take months and months to complete. So I was curious what attracted you to that kind of quest.
Absolutely. Just to be clear, when I hiked the Appalachian Trail the first time, and I took a sabbatical 4.5 months to do that hike, and I actually came off the trail twice to deal with whole food stuff. So 5 months. The other times I've hiked, I've done that a few weeks at a time. So I would take a vacation, basically. But I was so much into hiking, all my vacations were built around hiking. So something that might take 4 or 5 months to hike might take me 4 years to hike. Mm-hmm. The first time I did it, I wasn't trained in long distance hiking or anything like that. And honestly, we had 2 crises that occurred. Remember, that crisis that I mentioned occurred at the end of 2000, going into 2001. And then in 9/11, when we had the World Trade Center, I was in New York, very close to the World Trade Center. I was going, not to the World Trade Center, but I was going downtown that morning, to meet with the bond rating agencies. We were listening on the radio about the first airplane to run into one of the World Trade Centers, and we didn't think too much about it at the time because the driver that was taking us down there said, I remember back after World War II, a plane ran into the Empire State Building, and we thought it was just an accident. But we were very close, and we heard the second jet hit the second tower. We weren't very far away. And our car began to get rained on by debris. And everybody came running out of their office buildings, and we're all staring up. We stopped our car, looked up, and we saw it on fire. And I realized, oh my God, 2 towers? That's not a coincidence. This is a terrorist attack. And then I thought, I'm proud of myself. I thought to myself, New York might be under a terrorist attack. We need to get the hell out of this city. And they're going to shut this city down. They're going to close all the bridges. They're going to shut the city down. We got to get out of here. So we canceled everything. The bond agents, I said, they're going to close the airport down first because these came from planes. We got to get to the train station if we want to get out of here. So we went to Penn Central. We caught probably one of the last trains out. We only got as far as Philadelphia. And then we had to rent a car to drive back to Austin from that point. So I'm telling that whole story because that was a huge wake-up call for me. Remember, I'd had this wake-up call just a few months earlier about the bridge, and I realized, oh my God, I've been in that World Trade Center many times for meetings. I could have been in there today. I was going to be very close to there in Wall Street in those meetings. And I thought, you know what? I got to do some other things in life. I've been just working my ass off for 20 years. It was a wake-up call for me. And I thought, I'm going to do an adventure. And I just popped in my brain, I'm going to hike the Appalachian Trail. It's just, I had not thought about it before then. And so hiking is one of the ways I revitalize myself. I love to be in nature. And it's hard to, unless you do something like this, it's hard for people to understand. Your body gets to a level of fitness when you go on a long distance hike that's unmatched any other time in your life. If you're hiking 10 to 12 hours a day, your body adapts to it. And you just get unbelievably fit. I mean, your body gets lean and your lung capacity goes up, your heart's beat goes down, and you don't plateau. I mean, you just keep getting fitter the longer you do it. That was the healthiest and fittest I'd ever been in my life. So I great believer in revitalizing yourself. I've been doing Whole Foods for 42 years, Glenn. Most people burn out. And the way you don't burn out is that you have to revitalize yourself every day, regularly, every week. You got to take time off. You got to be in nature. You've got to have ways to manage stress.
So it feels like there's sort of 2 John Mackeys, and I realize these aren't mutually exclusive, of course. There's the the do-gooder, idealistic John who's trying to help people and help the planet. The John that's into sustainable farming. The John who personally is a vegan. The John who's hugging his colleagues at work and seeing if anyone wants to appreciate someone. That more loving, kinder, gentler John, if you will, the one that's been awakened. And then there's this hyper-competitive John who honestly came to dominate this industry. You gave a very rational explanation of how you did it. The reality is you don't build a business doing over 16 billion in sales, being some touchy-feely hippie, save the earth kind of persona, right? You're really driven, as you pointed out early on. Maybe could you help me reconcile these two? Like, were they always there in equal parts and some have surfaced more than others, or have you just evolved over time and one's more subsided?
One of the things that we talk a little bit about in the book, we talk about cultural intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
There's and this is one reason capitalism and business are so misunderstood. They think it's either purpose or profit. We have this sort of binary. We tend to think you're either winning or losing. We tend to think in these polar opposites. Mm-hmm. Good versus evil, light versus darkness, winning versus losing. And you've just done that kind of with me. Mm-hmm. You're hyper competitive and you're this very loving person. And how do you reconcile those two? Mm-hmm. It's because human beings are not binary. We're far more complex. There's many different aspects to who we are. We should be learning and growing all of our lives. There never comes a time where we don't have more things to learn and more things to grow. I know when I die, I will want there to be many unfinished projects, including myself, that won't be completely finished, because that makes life fun. It makes it fulfilling. It makes it an adventure. I do see life as an adventure, and with endless opportunities for learning and growing. So yeah, I am a competitive guy. I think it has to do a lot also with how much self-esteem and self-confidence you have. When you are hyper-competitive, but also you don't have a sort of self-confidence and assurance of who you are, that can come across as cutthroat, because you've got a binary framework. It's me against the world. If I'm either a winner or a loser, and I don't want to be a loser, so I got to do whatever it takes to win. As you mature, as you get more emotional intelligence, as you become more self-confident, more aware of who you are, it's like, I want to win. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't define who I am. It's not, if I lose at a board game, it doesn't mean I'm a worthless human being and has no value to contribute. But when I was younger, if I lost at something, maybe my self-esteem would swing way down, and you'd go to the opposite extreme and say, I'm not very good. I'm stupid. I'm not very talented. I mean, you have this internal critic, negative self-talk. So the whole binary way of thinking is kind of very limiting. We're very complex beings. Mm-hmm. There's lots of parts to who we are as human beings that we need to integrate together. And I've integrated those parts of my being together. I am hyper-competitive, and I'm a very loving person.
Very well said. We'll end with this. The name of the podcast is The Art of Excellence. And I always leave it to my guests to define that word excellence. So curious what it means to you.
For me, excellence it's part doing something with all my attention, all my heart, as best that I can do it. And then there's the aspect to it that it's just being competent. I will say excellence is something to strive for. We almost had a chapter in the book on excellence, by the way, because it's such an important quality. Excellence is something we aspire to, and we should aspire to all of our lives.
I like the answer. John, cannot thank you enough for not just being on the show, but opening up and being vulnerable and transparent with your own journey.
Thanks, Glenn. I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope we get to meet again sometime in the flesh and continue our conversation. I have a feeling if you and I could, we'd probably become good friends.
I think so. Until one of us beats the other in a game of chess.
No, I'd probably crush me in chess because I'm not very good at chess, but we'd still be friends.
Thank you, John. Hey, thanks for listening. Okay, don't go yet, please. 2 favors. I ask simply 2 favors. One, if you could please download the iTunes app. You can do it on your phone. You can do it on the computer. Take 60 seconds and leave a review. It means a lot. 2, you can find my episodes on several social media sites, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Find the one that you like the most. Find the one where you tend to have a lot of friends and followers. And if you could please either share it in the case of Facebook and LinkedIn, or retweet it on Twitter, that would mean the world to me. So those are the 2 asks I have. I love putting together this podcast. I hope you enjoy listening to it. Thank you so much, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.